I think not only can they live together, they have to live together, because without the two of them, you're going to have some really severe problems in any firm that's R&D intensive, innovation based, whatever, however you want to put it. So I started the session this morning with two claims, and the first claim is completely uncontroversial, so we didn't spend any more time on it, which is simply that innovation is required at a pretty rapid rate these days in all high-tech firms and many other firms. The second claim is more provocative, which is that most new ideas are bad. And that's actually empirically supported in virtually every study of R&D or innovation that I'm aware of. So if you look, for example, at the product design firm IDEO, right down here in downtown Palo Alto, they come up with thousands, literally thousands of product design ideas every year. Only a handful, I'm talking a few dozen, make it to market. And the philosophy of that firm is that they realize that most new product designs are flawed. I mean, bad is a strong word, and I use it to be provocative, but most new product designs are flawed in some serious way. And as the philosopher Karl Popper said a long time ago about scientific theories, the idea behind the scientific methods of testing is to kill off bad ideas before they kill us off. And so, on the one hand, claim one, we need innovation. Claim two, most new ideas are actually bad. So how do you combine them? Because you've got to combine them. And the reason you've got to combine them is because entrepreneurs must, in order to be effective, must worry about two kinds of error, not just one kind of error. You mentioned one. The danger of criticism killing off creativity points to type 1 errors, which is essentially not generating or not taking up good ideas, good new ideas, which would be breakthroughs or at least substantial improvements either in products or processes that firms are involved in. So that's the one, since we're at Stanford University and we're right near Silicon Valley, and a lot of our students want to be entrepreneurs, have been entrepreneurs, want to continue to be entrepreneurs, that's the one we tend to focus on. That's the one that's pointed to by the concern about criticism killing off creativity. But there are also type 2 errors. A type 2 error is the accepting of a bad idea. And this, since entrepreneurship by definition involves uncertainty and innovation by definition involves uncertainty, you don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows whether the idea that's being kicked around the table is actually going to turn out to be fruitful, to create value. We think it will, but we may not be very good judges of it, especially if we're the ones who actually came up with the idea. People are notoriously badly calibrated. I mean, everybody. It's very tough to be tough-minded about your own ideas. It's easier for me to be tough-minded about your ideas and for you to be tough-minded about my ideas, but my own ideas are like my mental children. I have two real children whom I love and nourish and cherish. Well, my mental ideas I love and nourish and cherish. I have never met anybody at the GSB or Stanford University or any other elite university I've ever been to that actually likes their ideas being criticized. A couple of ideas came out of the meeting this morning. One of them was an interesting kind of routine that one of the firms uses, which is they have a rubric, which are simply a bunch of criteria or dimensions regarding technical possibility, regarding market potential, and so on and so forth, that any new idea has to be scored on. And as the entrepreneur who does this explained to the rest of us, in his firm, it seems that there's an understanding that this isn't a personal matter. So I could have come up with an idea, a new idea, and it's promising on 4 of the 6 dimensions, but you know what? I didn't even think of dimensions 5 and 6. And it turns out my design is deficient on those. And this is just something that happens to people when they're designing new alternatives. It's hard keeping a large set of evaluation criteria in mind. And as he put it literally, and I'm quoting him, you know, the designer in one case just forgot dimensions 4 and 6. And so, and it turns out that the project idea is not very good on those 2 dimensions. Now, let's suppose that it's fixable on dimension 4. So it needs elaboration, which, you know, almost all new ideas require. Needs elaboration, and it turns out to be fixable. But on dimension 6, not so much. Well, you see, at this point, the process could have been shifted away from the ego and personality of the proposer and more toward the nature of the problem itself. And when people's attention shifts to the nature of the problem rather than to the person, then temperatures can cool down and you can focus on what needs to be done. A good criticism will help the problem solver figure out why they're stalled and what they can do about it. A global criticism of this is no good doesn't actually provide directive feedback of, well, okay, so what is it that I need to fix, and do you have any thoughts about how I might go about fixing it? Now, of course, you know, if I come up with a really terrible idea, in that context, if it's a really terrible idea and the organization's under a lot of time pressure, competitive pressure, it may be that, frankly, what you just got to do is pull the plug on that idea, on the project associated with it. And in that context, good feedback is fairly blunt. Traditionally, leaders have not tolerated being criticized. Just to take us back a little bit historically, what we might call the Enlightenment project, which goes back to Europe in the 1700s, what we call the Enlightenment project has to do with the creation of a new authority system in human institutions. And the authority system is not democracy. It's not ruled by the people, but it's rather ruled by evidence. The appearance of the empirical sciences in the 1700s and taking off really in the 1800s has to do with the creation and human organizations saying, look, you know, it doesn't matter how high up you are. If you're making a claim about the world, this is going to work, this is not going to work, it's an empirical claim, and you could be wrong. We're all fallible. That's the Enlightenment ethos. We are all fallible. I'll tell you a story, an innovation story. There was a doctor in Vienna in the mid-1800s named Semmelweis. Semmelweis worked in an obstetrics ward in an important Viennese hospital. And he didn't know anything about germs because the germ theory of disease, Pasteur and Robert Koch in Germany, hadn't been invented yet. 20 years later it would come. So, but Semmelweis was worried about pregnant women dying at terrible rates in his ward. And so I don't know how he stumbled on this empirical method. He stumbled on the idea of having his people, his doctors and residents and interns wash their hands in a chlorine solution between patients and, importantly, between doing autopsies and patients. You may find it hard to believe, but in those days, they would go from an autopsy directly to the obstetrics ward without washing their hands. Of course, their hands were just crawling with bacteria. They were killing women. So Semmelweis had them wash hands. And if you look at an overtime plot of the death rate in his ward, it went like this. Boom, 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 wash hands. You didn't need econometrics, you didn't need statistics. It was just obvious from eyeballing the data. Something about the chlorine solution was saving women's lives. Well, but, you know, a lot of doctors in Vienna refused to accept the evidence. And they were important doctors in positions of authority, and they didn't have to. And Semmelweis died an embittered man. It wasn't until Pasteur and Koch and so forth when we started to put the foundation under this, and then finally those kinds of death rates started to go away. But this is a long-term project. You put your finger on such an important problem, you can't expect it to be solved overnight. Human beings are not comfortable with the idea of saying the boss at the top is fallible too. Everybody in the organization is fallible. Everybody should be subject to the authority of evidence. But, when we compare, say, medical organizations we've got today or high-tech firms we've got today, we've come a long way from the 1850s. We have made a lot of progress. Smart leaders know how to create organizations that protect themselves from themselves. You do things like, we all eat in the same cafeteria. My office is not on the 15th floor and is huge and grand and everybody else. No, we do things to minimize the status differences inside the organization because it's those status differences that are constantly sending messages to people. The CEO is nearly a god. He's infallible. He's Steve Jobs. He can't make mistakes. Yeah? Hell, everybody makes mistakes. And when you're a leader of an organization, if you don't create the kind of organization that will correct your errors, you could lead your firm right over a cliff.